Hello, my name is Carl Surrey, and this is a video tutorial for the Facebook group called Fans of Serif Software. Now, I did a written version of this back in about August 2015, and that written version PDF can be downloaded from the Facebook group files section. So you can either use the written version, or you can use this video version in conjunction with the written version, because it is quite involved and can get a bit complicated at times. It's an adaptation of a Photoshop tutorial, and I had to sort of go off script slightly from the Photoshop tutorial because they use the displace command, and PhotoPlus does have a displace command, but it doesn't work in quite the same way. So I did have to adapt that part of it quite differently, and the end result probably isn't as good in PhotoPlus, rather than Photoshop. So basically the idea of this tutorial is to make some false water and a reflection to make this look as though this was taken from across the river or something like that. Obviously this would work best on a landscape picture like this, especially if you've got a nice straight edge, because if I go to the original picture, that is the original picture, and below here was a car park actually, which is why I cropped it down and lost all this grass and gravel of the car park. So if you can get a similar picture where it would look quite natural to have like a riverbank or water below it, this is what you want to be looking for. So with your start image, the first thing you want to do is to duplicate your start image. So you can just come over to the layers display area, which is over here, and you can just right click the background layer and then come up to duplicate. And once you've done that, you can rename it if you want, but there's no need, and then you can just click OK. And as you can see here, we now have two versions of that image in the layers display area. Right, the next thing you want to do is we need to highlight the bottom of these two layers. You just click on it so it becomes darker. So this one is now the active layer, because what we are going to do is we're going to extend the canvas of this bottom layer only, not the top layer. So what we need to do is come up to the image menu and then canvas size. Now it will be set, I think by default, to pixels, but we want it to be percent, and it will start off, and these will go to 100, but put a tick in the relative box and they will become 0. So we just want to make the height up to 100, because we are only extending the height of the image, not the width of the image. Now at the moment, as you can see in this little box here, the image is anchored in the center, because the anchor point is this black dot here, and it anchors the image in the center. So if I clicked OK now, it would add 50% of height to the top and 50% of height to the bottom, which is not what we want. So if I click into this top little box up here, the image will now be anchored to the top. It can't put any new image above that, so all the 100% image will be below it. So if I click OK now, I'll just zoom out slightly, And as you can see, this now has an exact size duplication below it, and I did forget to mention that you have to make sure that this is set to white. Let me just go back and undo that, and then go to image, canvas size. It doesn't seem to give you an option to alter the color anyway, so that's just as well. There we go. Yes, because we need to. I know we're going to fill this with color, but at the start it does need to be white. Okay, so we have now got to that point. You now have your bottom layer with the extended canvas, and if I turned off that bottom layer, as you can see, the top layer, there's nothing there because it's blank, because it's not been extended. Right, I'll turn that layer back on again. So next thing we have to do is we need to select this bottom area here, and there is a sort of cheat shortcut we can use for this. If I highlight the top layer, and as that top layer technically only has pixels in the top half, we can quickly select that area by holding down the control key and clicking on the icon in the layer display area. And as you can see, the marching ants of the selected area is only in covering that area. So if I use the move tool, I can move that down to there. So this would be what we are going to use as part of the reflection of the top layer, or what is now the top image, but it's on the bottom layer, if you see what I mean. So what we now need to do is to make a new layer in between these two. So what I'll do is I'll now highlight the bottom layer in the layer display area, and then come down to this white box with a cross in it and create a new layer in between these two layers, and it's blank, there's no pixels on it. And because this area is still selected, we're going to add color. If I turn off that one and that one, as you can see what I mean, we are working on this layer and that area is selected, and we are going to add color to that selected area. Now by default your foreground and background colors are probably black and white or white and black. They might be reversed, but we need to have a blue foreground color. So if you just click in the foreground color box, the color selector panel will open, and I'm going to pick, you could pick any blue you want, just come to the blue range and pick a color, whatever one you want. But I'm going to use the one that I used for my tutorial, which was the red was 11, green was 22, and the blue was 183. Okay, so now as you can see up here, blue is the foreground color, and you can press F on the keyboard, or you can select the flood fill tool from the menu down the left, and when you get this little pot paint, and then just come into the selected area and click, and it will fill that area. And as you can see from these layers, there is now blue in that area there. And if I turn these back on, that won't be visible anymore because it is in between and hidden underneath this top layer. Right, now we don't need that selected area anymore, so you can press Ctrl and D to remove those marching ends. So moving on to the next section, what we need to do now is to highlight the top layer, which bizarrely is the bottom image, if you see what I mean, and we want to flip this over so it is a reflection of the top. So you can come up to image and flip vertically and then flip layer, and then that will flip that over so we now have the reversed image. You may have, like me, a very slight line where these join, but hopefully we can you can sort that out later, maybe with a bit of cloning or blurring. But we'll carry on with doing this, and you can sort of tinker with any minor imperfections later on. So next thing we want to do is we need to lock the opacity of the pixels in this layer. So we're again making sure that the top layer is the one that is highlighted, and then you have just above this you have the word lock. We've got 4 icons, which is opacity, pixels, position and all. But you just want to click on the lock opacity, and then that will help because we're going to add some motion blur, and you're sort of locking the effect really only onto this layer. I mean, it won't sort of motion blur the layer above. So let me just come off of this tool. I'll just click on that one quickly. So to add motion blur, you come up to Effects, Blur, and then down to Motion Blur, and then you get this motion blur dialog. Now, as you can see, from whatever it was last used set on, it has already had an effect on the reflection area, so it's already starting to look a bit like water reflecting the image. Now how far you push that is up to you. I mean, you just go quite high on. See, the higher you go, the less of the image will look more like a reflection. So you don't necessarily want to go too high. I would imagine around the 30 to 40 range. Yeah, I'm going to leave it around 30, 35-ish mark. Again, you can change the angle of the blur by just rotating this arrow. So again, a lot depending on your image and what works best. I mean, in fact, when I had it up here, like this blue line was just showing along there. But if I altered the blur angle, that blue line is not as noticeable. I might need to just maybe tone down the distance slightly going from that direction. Yeah, so that's not too bad. It might come down just a tad more. Yeah, because when I had the angle at 90, I think the higher distance worked better. But now I've changed the angle to 192 to help get rid of that blue line. I've had to lower the distance to make it, for me personally, look more correct. More natural, that's the word I'm looking for. So now pretty much this is looking not too bad in my opinion. You could almost stop at this point. Now the next part we're going to look at is just trying to add some ripples to this water, because although it does look not too bad, it doesn't look quite as natural or water-like. So we're going to use the displace command, and this is where it goes off script from the tutorial that I did. But first of all, what we need to do is add a layer mask to this currently active top layer, and to do that you can just click on the add layer mask icon, which is down here, and then it adds this white layer mask here. And what we are going to do to that is we're going to add a gradient to it, so it will make the water sort of darker and getting lighter as it comes nearer to the bottom of the picture. Now the gradient tool is in the same menu with the flood fill tool, or you could just press G. Now by default it should be black going to white, and if it isn't, you can just click in here and make sure that the first one is the option that's being selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a gradient down the picture, and what this will do is help to bring some of the blue from the middle layer into the reflected area to make it darker in places, especially near the joining of the land, because of the gradient will be coming down this way. So if I just if you hold down the shift key, it will draw a straight line, and as you can see there, it is not affecting the top part of the image because of the layer mask, and it is darker near the land and it gets lighter as it goes along. Now that might be a bit too much blue coming through, so what I'll do is I'll use the undo button, and I'm going to lower the opacity of the gradient down to about, let's try 50%, see how that looks. Then hold down the shift key again. There you go. I think that's a bit better. It just has a bit more blue to that bottom section. Whether you want it to be bluer or not, I will leave that up to you, how you set the opacity for the gradient that we have just added. Right. So again, at this point you could save it, and you might just need to merge your layers and maybe just tinker with the line where these join and just sort of help blur that a little bit using clone tools or blur tools. I will leave that up to you. But if you want to go on slightly further, we're now going to use the Displace tool, which I mentioned earlier, which doesn't work the same way in PhotoPlus as it did in the tutorial, so it will not look as good, but we'll have a go. If you come up to the effects menu and to distort and displace, this will open the displace options. Now, as I've not used this tool since I bought this new version of PhotoPlus, which is version X8, I do not currently have a pattern set in here, so any alterations that would technically have an effect, because the sliders are moved slightly from their default positions to their default positions. It's having absolutely no effect on the image. So I will need to be selecting a pattern to go in there, but at the moment what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the scale mode from tile to stretch to fit, and undefined areas I'm going to click on repeat edge. So now we need to select a pattern. Now if you click, you may already have a pattern in this area, and if there was one it would have had an effect on the water area, but I will click into that area and it will open the patterns box where you can select all sorts of patterns. If I click on that one, if I click on various ones, you can see the pattern is coming into that area there, and it's probably not having too much effect on the bottom area, but you can, there are all sorts of different patterns here. Let's have a look at abstract. No, it's probably not having too much effect. Let me just click OK on that for the moment. It's not having too much effect because there's not that much adjustments being made. If I move up the horizontal and the vertical, it should be having an effect. Oh, I know what I've done wrong. Silly schoolboy error. Just going to show you what I should have done. I'm still highlighted on the layer mask, as it's got the white line around it. I'm trying to affect the layer mask and I can't. It needs to be affecting the actual image. So if I click on the image icon, the little white box will go around the image icon. So make sure that you do that. You click on the thumbnail of that layer, and then we'll try the distort, displace, and select a pattern. There you see it is affecting that bottom area quite horribly. Let's go back to the original one, which is, I think this is by default would be if the one that would have been in the pattern selection area. So again, I can now alter the effect that this displaces the pixels. Now obviously this is going to have effect on the areas, especially around the edges, but we can always crop the image down a bit afterwards to lose this. And mainly just want to concentrate on your reflection and how much effect you want this to have. If you push it too far, it just gets weirder and weirder. So we're just trying to add sort of a ripple effect on the water. So you don't necessarily want to go too mad with it. And I think I will leave that at that. Oh, I forgot to alter the stretch to fit and repeat edge, which makes that a smoother image. And now I can actually distort, push this a bit higher. See, again, you don't want to go too mad with it, but it does sort of give that sort of more rippled effect to the water. So I will click OK on that, and that is pretty much the end of the tutorial there, because I've gone as far as I can. Obviously there is some work that needs to be done on this area here, but you can see what it is we're trying to do. So I could merge these layers down. If I zoom in quite a bit, you can see that it's obviously not a great join here, but you are on the road to being close to what it is I was trying to achieve, getting the water reflection. Now, partly this is down to PhotoPlus not working quite the same way as Photoshop, and also might also be down to the image you're using yourself, because I mean, it depends on how dark or you make the reflection, that it's going to be more obvious where this joins, or if there was a wall here rather than grass, it might have been easier to define or hide the fact that there is a join. But like I said, if I had the time and the patience, I could go through and probably help blur that image line so it doesn't look so obvious. But that's probably for another tutorial. So I will leave it at this point and let you tinker with. You can try different patterns. You don't have to use the ones that I used. Different patterns will give you a different sort of ripple on the effect. You can even upload your own patterns. If I just use the undo tool to go back to the layered version rather than the merged layers version, I will add in a new pattern. If I just go to the effects, distort, displace menu again, in the drop down menus there is one called My Patterns. Now I currently have one in there which is part of a photograph I took of the sea nearby, and I just cut out a section of that sea and I uploaded via this. There's a little drop down menu here and you can add items, and when you click on that it will ask you, you can navigate to the effect that you want to add. But like I said, I've added this C option, and times I do that, and then it has a much more rippled effect because it's obviously naturally rippled because of the C image that I'm using. So that will be the end of this tutorial. I hope that you've learned something from it. Sorry it's a bit disjointed, but I'm trying to read instructions and sort of narrate at the same time, which I'm not very good at. So I'm sorry for the unprofessionalism, but I hope you have enjoyed it and learned something. Thank you very much, and goodbye.